Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodo. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. My name is Tony Bodo. I am the CEO of Tony Bodo International.
And I'm Betsy Westhafer, CEO of the Congruity Group.
Betsy, I have got to tell you, I am so excited for our audience to hear this interview with Eddy. His company, and I realized we got through the interview and didn't really talk about what his company does. So his company, Eden Green Technology, they build vertical greenhouses, but the technology is beyond what you could imagine. And so we're going to talk about that as we go through this. But I think the bigger takeaway for me is what an amazing individual Eddy is. His background is phenomenal. He's worked in the White House for 2 different administrations. He's just been a phenomenal individual from that perspective. And then he takes us through very early in the interview, takes us through this concept of how he determined what he would do after building a successful company, how he would live the rest of his life and what he would do there and how he ended up at Eden Green. So to me, I mean, this interview was something beyond what I expected and really a ton of takeaways for me that I want to apply in my own business, in my own life.
Agreed, 100%. I'm just so inspired by the leader he is, the person he is, how he functions with such intentionality, which we talk about in the interview, and the problem he's out to solve. It's really, really important work that he's doing, and don't want to be a spoiler. So our listeners can hear exactly how impactful the work that Eden Green is doing. So yeah, agreed. This is one that really sticks in my heart. So without further ado, let's meet Eddy Badrina from Eden Green Technologies. Eddy, welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be on it.
Yeah, well, we want to make sure that our audience knows who you are and how you got to this point in your career. So if you could just kind of start at a good starting point and just kind of give us the background on you and how you landed at Eden Green and the work you're doing now.
Sure. So I took a bit of a circuitous path. So it may be some encouragement to your listeners. I didn't start out in ag. In fact, I got a degree in psychology, got a bachelor's degree in psychology, and then got a master's in public administration and international affairs. So I had a chance to work for Bush Sr. in his personal office in Houston, and then went to his grad school, and then ended up working in the Bush administration, the W administration. And I was at the State Department as an analyst, both pre and post 9/11, and the Middle East was my portfolio. So it was a bit of a crazy time. And then after that, about 4 years of that just sort of burned me out. And of course, what do I do next? Is I go into an even higher profile position, which was I was President Bush's Asian American spokesperson for 2 years, from 2004 to 2006. So if that didn't burn me out, nothing else would. So I actually left DC with my wife and child. We went back to Texas, where I'm originally from. And from there had a chance to work for a telecom startup, and then ultimately started my own company, a digital ad agency called BuzzShift in 2010. Sold that, grew it from scratch. So I bootstrapped it, grew it from scratch, sold it in 2016, and then bought it back 11 months later. That's a whole story in and of itself. It's probably another podcast. But then when we bought it back, I had a chance to take a step back and really think, what do I want to do with the second half of my career? And over the course of, I would say, a year, there are 3 things that I identified and had a chance to really clearly articulate. One is I wanted to run a hardware software firm. I had been there and done that and gotten the M&A t-shirt. The second was I wanted to have an exponential impact on my level of effort. So for every 1 unit of effort that I put out, I wanted to see a 10 to 20x return or impact on society and culture around me. And then the thing I wanted to do is I wanted to run what's called a redemptive organization. And we can get to that in a bit. But those three things were really heavy on my mind. And so I had to, one, clearly articulate, like I'm doing with y'all now. I had to learn to clearly articulate that and be very focused and concise on what I wanted, which is really important for entrepreneurs and for leaders, to clearly articulate and know what you want. The second thing that I had to do was that I had to run it through a filter of just close colleagues and friends and family. I would call them like my unofficial board of advisors, if you will. And I had to run it through that filter to make sure I wasn't doing anything out of like selfish ambition or vain conceit, as the Bible puts it, but really was doing it from a healthy place. And then the third thing I had to do was really just go for it. Right. So it was interesting. I had to actually, one, let go of it. And then two, I also had to look for opportunities where they came available. And so it's this really weird paradox of, letting go and being all right wherever, some people would say the universe takes you. In my terms, it's wherever God puts me, right? So if I'm supposed to stay at BuzzShift, that's great. If I'm supposed to pursue this thing that's on my heart, that's great. But a guy named Terry Looper in his book Sacred Pace calls it getting in neutral. So I had to get in neutral. But once I got in neutral, I just found myself seeing the opportunities, and the opportunities came my way. And so Eden Green was one of those opportunities that as soon as I saw it and as soon as I talked with the lead investors, it became very clear to me. It checked all three of those boxes of hardware, software, of exponential impact, and of the makings of a redemptive organization. So it was the easiest hard decision I ever made, to jump off of BuzzShift and leave it in the great hands of my business partner and the leadership team there, and then jump on to Eden Green. So I've been here with Eden Green as the CEO since late 2019. So that is a really quick run up to how I got to where I got to.
So Eddy, I'm curious. I love everything about the way you approached it. What was your background leading up to that you knew how to be so intentional about how you were going to approach this move? I'm just curious, is there a spiritual guide that you follow, or did you have some kind of training, or how did you know how to be that intentional?
Man, that is a great question. I think I learned to be intentional both in what I wanted to do and in the relationships that I have for my parents. They actually, yesterday, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, which is fantastic. I mean, there's just so much legacy that's just packed into being able to be happily married for 50 years, right? And so I think that legacy, I don't think I know that legacy really rubbed off on me, of being intentional about relationships and then being intentional about what you want. I would say I had just good mentors all throughout my career and even in college. I specifically sought out mentors even in college that were maybe one step ahead of me, that were maybe really, really much older and wiser than me. In fact, when I was 20, I think my mentor in college that I sought out was in his late 70s. And so I just kind of learned to sit under the feet of people who are much wiser than me. And the one thing that, leader after leader taught me, from that guy, his name was Ford Madison, all the way to both President Bush's, was just about the intentionality of relationships and defining what you want. And so I think that's where I learned it. And as I grew in my career, the mentors that were in the State Department and then the White House, and then later on, all had that common trait, is they were very, very intentional about relationships.
I know this is not where we were going to go with the podcast, but I love where you're talking right now, because the Oracle of Delphi, I believe it was above the Oracle of Delphi. They say, know thyself.
Yes.
Was at least one of the Greek temples had it. But I think you're hitting on something here that we've never talked about on this podcast, and that is how intentional you have to be with yourself and how you have to know yourself in order to then extend that into your organization to really know your customer. Because if you don't know yourself, I don't think you can really get to knowing your customer.
Yeah, there is a humility, and I've told folks, like, the biggest detriment to leaders, or the biggest thing that keeps leaders from true success, and not just financial, but just overall professional success, is insecurity. And insecurity, in turn, is found in not really knowing and accepting who you are and what your identity is, right? Insecurity tends to bring up fear and doubt. Insecurity tends to bring up overly controlling leadership qualities. Insecurity tends to have people paper over their weaknesses and then over compensate with their strengths. But a leader who really knows themselves, and it's an ongoing journey, but a leader who really knows themselves and is intellectually honest with who they are and what their strengths and weaknesses are more likely to hire the folks that are smarter than them, because then they're not fearful of that person being better than they are, right? They're more likely to just say, I don't know, right? Which is huge for a leader to say, but I'm going to lead the way through this, right? A better, more healthy identity and self-awareness allows people just to be comfortable in who they are, and be comfortable in their strengths, and don't worry about their weaknesses, because they're going to hire, or they're going to train people, or they're just going to, find a way to shore up those weaknesses, but not within themselves. It's through other people, through a great team. So you're absolutely, absolutely correct. The best leaders that I know are unbelievably humble about their strengths, and they're unbelievably transparent about their weaknesses.
And, I think that also translates into customers. I know I've been guilty of this. I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs that would take any customers no matter what, because they feel like, oh, I may never get another chance at a customer. And then they end up working with customers that cause a lot of angst. They're not a good fit. But they're doing it at all costs to get customers. So I'm sure you probably have seen that yourself, and probably could offer up a few wise words of wisdom about the fallacy in that thinking.
Yeah, I've got two examples, one in BuzzShift and then one recently in Eden Green, where we knew what we were good at, and we actually chose to go a different direction from a client. So in BuzzShift, we actually had a really big telecom company, like the biggest in the nation. I won't name them, but you can figure it out. But we actually worked with them for a year and a half, and it was such a whip for our team. Morale was down. Our margins were low. We were overworking and underpaid. And at the end of our review, they actually wanted to re-up us. And we actually came to them and said, here's a strategy for the next year. And we're actually going to decline to execute on this strategy. And we're going to resign from the account. And for a small agency to do that to a huge telecom company, they were besides themselves. But my business partner, Cameron, and I just really had to make that call of, this is not what we're good at. This is not working out. And we want to save our team in the long run by taking this short-term hit. It was a 25% hit to our income, but it was worth it. We made that up in less than 6 months, because we just knew what our team was good at and what they weren't good at, and what was going to be healthy for them. And then recently in Eden Green, 6 weeks into my tenure here, we had a contracts with two of the largest grocery retailers. But the problem was we were losing money on every shipment we were making to them, because our ops weren't level that they needed to be. And then honestly, our harvests from the yield size of the plants weren't where they needed to be. And so that was one of my first moves as CEO, was to go to both of those, to have 2 consecutive conversations with really, really big retailers and say, hey, y'all, it's not you, it's us. We need to put a pause on our relationship, and hopefully we can come back to you with something that makes sense for both our sides. But right now, we can't continue this relationship. It's just not healthy for us in our long-term business plans. And they respected that totally, but it allowed our team just to be able to focus on what we were really good at, which is growing greens and the technology, and less about selling into stores and all the merchandising that goes with that. So that's one thing where I knew intrinsically what the business was really, really good at. Peter Thiel talks about the 10x factor, like know what you're 10x better than anyone else in your market or in your industry, and then focus on that. Right. And then you can gain ground on that, gain a foundation in that. And then you start to expand into other markets, or you start to expand into other avenues or channels. But really your 10x differentiator is what's going to set you apart from the rest. So when you're a young company, don't chase after the dollars. Don't let capital dictate strategy, but do it the other way around. Let strategy dictate capital. Let your 10x differentiator dictate who you're going after, and then trust the process.
Can you take us a little bit through that? We talked before in our prep about some of the changes when you came on there with Eden Green to really look at the customer, to really get to know the customer. You went through quite an extensive process, and this sounds like part of that process you were going through there to really realign the company. So take us through that, and what does it really mean to the company now that you've realigned?
So it was very simple, but it was very difficult. So the simple part was, again, focusing on our 10x. And when I came in, I immediately saw our 10x was our technology, and then what it allowed us. So once I was able to focus on the technology, then I said, hey, y'all, we're going to be a technology company. We're not going to be a retail greens company. Let everyone else do their own brands. That's awesome. Go for it. They've got hundreds of millions of dollars in backing. We don't. So let's just focus on what we do best, which is our tech. And then out of that tech, then you say, okay, who's the possible audience for this? And then what are the value propositions? So I had to teach my team something, and most of them are engineers and horticulturalists. But I really had to teach the team the difference between benefits and features. So I use this analogy all the time, but back in the day, I'm old enough to remember Bill Gates coming out with the Zune, right? The first MP3 player. And he came out and it was called the Zune, some fanciful name. And he, got on stage and he said, hey, this is the Zune. This is an MP3 player. It has 1,000 megabytes worth of memory. The battery lasts for up to 8 hours, and it's at 2 inches by 4 inches with a headphone jack. Great. Dud. Later, not even first to market, second to market, Steve Jobs came with the iPod, and it was not it wasn't a fanciful name. It was literally it was all about the consumer. iPod is about them, even the name of it. This iPod holds 1,000 songs. It lasts all day, and it fits in your pocket. Gates talked about features. Jobs talked about benefits and value prop. And so I had to teach my team, hey, no one wants to hear about the features. If we go up and start to feature compare, it's just not even, we're going to be lost, right? Investors aren't that, knowledgeable on this stuff. Competitors, we're all holding our tech close to the vest. So there's no sort of comparables. We have to talk about our benefits and our value prop. And so our value proposition to folks who want to buy this technology are, we can produce more consistent, year round, because we have such density in our greenhouses, we can be accessible to almost everyone. We're not building 60 acres out on either coast or in the middle of the heartland. We're actually building 1.5 acre greenhouses that can produce tons of greens a year, right next to distribution centers in and around urban areas. So we're accessible, we're consistent, and we're safe. We're food safe. And so we've got the highest possible scores on food safety that third-party auditors come in every year and score. And we have a culture of food safety in our company. So when you are accessible to everyone, that means everyone can afford it. 2, you're consistent year round. So you don't have to wait, you're not waiting, 6 months out of the year, you can't get X, Y, or Z greens. And then 3, you're safe. And so the consumer and the retailers know that they're buying things that are not going to have E. coli and salmonella outbreaks, and you're more trustworthy. When you put all those together, we're basically redefining what locally grown means, right? Those are benefits and value props that make sense to a consumer, not the fact that we, have 300,000 plant spots in a greenhouse and we can grow 550 tons of greens a year, and we use 99% less water and 98% less land, which is all true, and they're all environmental benefits. But the reality is they want to know that their food is safe. They want to know that they can afford it, and they want to know that they can buy it year round.
So Eddy, tell us who the they is that you're referring to, and your business model, who the problem you're solving, how you go about your business.
Yeah. So, we're really trying to solve the problem of getting nutritious greens to people consistently. Fresh greens, fresh produce, nutritious produce consistently to everyone. How we solve that is we actually sell our technology to investors who are interested in having a profitable business or profitable venture on a piece of real estate that's close to an urban center. And then 2, we're also selling it to the offtake, the produce, to other growers, right? So in our industry, there are labels that no one really notices and growers that no one really notices, but they sell the bulk of produce to your Walmarts and Albertsons and Whole Foods. And then, also your Aramarks and your US Food Service and your those folks who are what we call institutional buyers, and they serve hospitals and restaurants and hotels, right? So you have institutionals and you have retail. They get their produce from growers and distributors. We sell our technology as well as the greens to those growers and distributors. And we just want to be the best, most reliable source of greens for those growers and distributors. And then then in turn sell it to on the retail scene as well as institutional. So that's basically what we're doing. We're a greenhouse as a service, if you will, and a technology platform for the growing and growers and distributors of our industry.
I love that, greenhouse as a service. So following up on that, if you were sitting in a coffee shop, what would you love to hear someone say about Eden Green, about the way you interact with your customers? Just what would be the ideal scenario for what you could overhear?
Man, if I would love to hear someone say, wow, we've just signed a contract, or we're getting greens from the most trustworthy, consistent growers you will ever find. And wait till you taste these. And I mean, it truly, if you're ever down in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, I encourage you or your audience to reach out to me. I'll give y'all a tour of our facilities. But the best thing about the tour is we eat and talk along the way, and we pick things straight off the vine. It's actually cleaner than washing it because we have such high cleanliness standards. But the taste profile, because of the way we grow our produce and just the technology that's involved, which is patented here in the States, like no one else can do this. The taste profile is unbelievable. Your arugula will bite back at you. Your spinach is not bitter. I mean, there's almost a sweetness to it. We grow nasturtium, which is this edible flowers that you eat the whole flower, and it's sweet on the front of the palate, and then as you chew into it, it's got this spicy back end kick. I mean, all the people who walk through our greenhouse and eat our greens, they are amazed at the taste profile of it. And it's just because of the way we grow it. So if someone said, man, y'all got to check out Eden Green, or just go to the store and make sure you buy this brand, because Eden Green's the folks who are growing it, you'll never taste better lettuce. You'll never taste better kale or arugula. I'd love to hear that.
That's awesome. And I am going to take you up on that because we are doing an advisory board meeting, I believe, middle of November in Dallas. So
come on.
Yeah. We'll definitely take you up on that.
Bring it. I'm excited.
That's awesome. So you said a couple of interesting things there that really struck me is you're talking about the being locally scalable. And I'm sitting here, I've got two daughters, one's 16, one's 18. And my 18-year-old decided probably 5 or 6 years ago to go mostly vegan.
Mm-hmm.
And I've watched the market shift, and Gen Z is changing the marketplace before they even had money to do so.
Oh yeah.
How do you see that playing out over the next 3 to 5 years? I think for agriculture in general, but maybe more specifically for the type of work that you're doing.
Yeah. So there's a couple of shifts in the marketplace that we're seeing in industry trends that's being driven by the younger set, by Gen Z, by millennials as well. And one is nutrition, right? They are much more likely to be vegan or vegetarian than the older folks in our country. The problem with that is it's expensive, right? It is way more expensive to go vegetarian than it is just to eat processed foods, or even to go vegan and eat processed foods. So they're looking for cost savings everywhere they can go that equal the quality that they need to. So there is this real high demand for quality but affordable food. I think the second industry trend that we're seeing because of the pandemic is actually locally grown. So in the industry, there's a higher demand, 400% increase in demand for locally grown foods, even higher of a demand than organic. I think organic is a great label, and there's some great aspects to it, but a lot of it is marketing and PR. And people are starting to see through some of the organic opaqueness, if you will, and they really want to know where their food's grown, right? So there's that piece. And then on the other side, on the supply side, there's an interest in urban agriculture. And you see it in the community gardens, you see it in the co-ops, but everyone, I think, implicitly knows that can't feed the whole population. It's very mom and pop right now. It's very one-off. It's for the folks who can afford it both financially as well as time-wise. Like I know a lot of single parents, 3 kids, they're not going to the farmer's market on the weekend because they got to work their second job or their kids have games or whatnot, right? It really is a luxury to go to a farmer's market, especially in the urban area. So, but people want that. People want local, and people want just that change in urban ag. So that's where we fit in. And then the pandemic hit, and it was like, man, the supply chain is just gone to hell in a handbasket. We've seen I want to say it's a 400% increase in the cost of logistics, right? So if you talk to folks in the Salinas Valley, which in California, that's where 90% of all lettuce is grown, and it's where 25% of all produce is grown for the United States. Salinas Valley, California. They're not worried about water, which they should be. They're not even that much. They are worried, but it's not their number one concern of labor, which it will continue to be. Their number one concern is shipping and supply chain. They can't get it across the country or even to the middle of the country and not lose their shirts on costs. It's a penny industry, remember? So lettuce you're selling for, $1.50 a pound. If you all of a sudden raise your shipping cost 4x, you just become unprofitable shipment after shipment. You can only do that for so long. So we've seen a real fragility in the supply chain, and that's a demand that we're meeting as well. Because when you can place a greenhouse and place consistent day after day harvests, because our harvests run 11 to 13 times a year, and you plant them staggered wise. So when one row is being planted, 2 rows planted, the next one's growing. By the time you get to the 30th row, you're harvesting and then you're planting all over again, right? So it's this continual perpetual harvest that we have. When you can put a really dense, cost-efficient greenhouse that's profitable, that does a perpetual harvest 20 yards from a distribution center or 20 miles from a distribution center, you're changing the supply chain, like fundamentally changing the supply chain, and you're getting rid of all of those costs of logistics and distribution. So that's where we're really revolutionizing the industry, and people are it's taken us a year and more, almost 2 years, to really educate people on what we are trying to do and how we're trying to do it. And our numbers are so unbelievable on profitability and on yields that the people are just doing double and triple takes on our pro formas, and then having to go out to the greenhouse and really see that it exists and it's real. And we've been running at it for 3 years, and we're not just a little small sample size. We've been running at it for 3 years in a 40,000 square foot greenhouse. Like, it's no joke. It's the real deal. And now people are saying, oh, that's how you want to change the industry. Got it. Right. And that revolution, all of a sudden, if you're in an urban area and you're employing 30 people, which we can because we're so cost efficient on our operations, who are you going to employ? Your neighbors, right? So no longer do you have migrant workers. You have people making living days wages with health benefits, walking to work or taking a short shuttle to work every day. They're working 9 to 5, or when the hot summer months here, they're working 6 to 2. So it's very much, we want to not just benefit the employee, we actually want to bless them and be very generous to them in the way that they operate and what they receive in terms of payment. But man, you have 30 people doing that in a depressed area, which is, by the way, where the most strategic, cheapest land is located, in underserved economic areas, right? So you've got this unbelievably technologically advanced greenhouse in the most underserved of populations, strategic distribution point. You're employing your neighbors. You're giving them full-time jobs in a career platform that's not just a dead-end job, but it's an industry that's going to grow 10x in the next 5 years. That is a redemptive organization. That is what we're after. And people are starting to see it, and they're starting to believe it. And it's super exciting.
Check that box on the redemptive organization.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. So tell us a little bit about what's on your radar. I mean, clearly you have a very clear vision, and you're very intentional about what you're doing. Just the energy that you're exuding tells me that there's more. So what's more on your radar?
So our vision is to have a mesh network of these greenhouses all across the United States. And it's because when you just have one in an urban area, that can feed a lot of people. But when you start putting them in sort of this closely distributed nodes of greenhouses in major metropolitan areas, you start to get this economies of scale effect that's much like, it really is much like the mesh network that you're starting to see in homes, but have been in buildings for Wi-Fi, right? You can walk seamlessly across the building and have Wi-Fi the entire time, right? There's an ease of use. There's a reliability aspect to it. And there's just a trustworthiness about wherever I go, I'm always going to get Wi-Fi. In the same way with this mesh network of greenhouses, wherever you go, you can always get locally grown, nutritious, affordable greens, right? Even if we have another disruption to the supply chain, it won't affect this mesh network, because one goes down, you've got 6 or 7 others in a 100-mile radius, right? That are just all right around each other. And it reduces the pressure on our infrastructure to deliver all these greens, and this actually becomes an infrastructure in and of itself. We're making a produce infrastructure with this mesh network of greenhouses. So that's the vision for it. And it's not just applicable in the United States, it's applicable all around the world.
I love that concept. And as you were sharing it, it reminded me of the concept that Netflix had to deploy to really grow. They couldn't have a warehouse in LA and a warehouse in Boston. They had to build basically a mesh network across the country so that you could get your DVDs back when it was DVDs
right
in a day, because you don't want to wait for 3 or 4 days to get your DVDs. And I also find it fascinating and inspiring to see how you're taking these really what's been developed from a network perspective in computing and applying it to agriculture, the physical network in agriculture. So I find that really fascinating and inspiring. So what do you think needs to happen? I mean, these could be, convergences that are happening already, but what do you think needs to happen for you to really achieve that end state?
Yeah. So the biggest thing is because we're only 3 years old, we've got a greenhouse we had an R&D greenhouse that the demand for greens was so great, we actually had to convert it into a production facility. So we converted to a production facility. We're building another one. For our perspective, we just need more capital, more investors to believe in us and to invest in these greenhouses and to deploy these greenhouses as quickly as possible. Once people see the network, like call it 5 or 6 of these greenhouses, again, they're only 1.5 acres large, but they're deployed in a regional mesh network, they'll get it. And then the rocket really takes off. So the convergences that you were speaking of, they're already there. Market demand is there. The supply chain fragility, as well as just the supply of greens and produce, the lack of supply is there. Like the demand from consumers is there. So it's all there. People are just trying to solve it in different ways. I don't think there's going to be any one winner in our space. There'll probably be 3 or 4, and they'll all have different sort of, what Thiel calls the 10x differentiator. And I know we'll be one of them. So we're on a capital raise right now to start to really ramp up building out these greenhouses.
So Eddy, a lot of times what we like to do on the show is ask our audience, which by the way is senior leaders, C-suites listening to this show, what they can do to support your efforts. So obviously you're looking for investors. What's the best path to do anything about that? Is that to reach out to you directly or,
yeah.
Okay.
So
go ahead.
So there are 3 pieces of our, 3 major pieces of our, how we're structured, how our deals are structured. 1 is capital, right, to build the greenhouses. 2 is operations, and we've got that. Most of the capital that's coming to us is basically saying, "Hey, Eddy, can you guys? We love the organization, we love the greenhouse concept, we love the profitability model, but we're not farmers. Can y'all run it for us, right?" And so much like real estate, you've got developers and then property managers who just then manage the property. We're doing that. We offer a turnkey service to manage and run those greenhouses. So you've got capital, operations, then the last one is offtake, which is who's buying the produce. For anyone who wants to know how they can help, man, capital's great. Offtake is probably even more important. We need folks to come to us and say, we want to buy your produce. And, when I say folks, I mean like restaurants and institutional, buyers, retailers, folks who are interested, those companies, those organizations that are interested in supplying, in buying nutritious, consistent greens at a good price, and that to then pass that on to the consumer. That's who are really interested. And so right now, as an example, we've got a lot of interest from growers who cannot rely on their current contractors, their contract farms of growing. We're getting a lot of interest from the food service folks of the world, the Sodexos and the Benny Keiths and the U.S. food service, because they are looking for more consistent produce coming out closer to their distribution centers. And finally, we're getting interest from retailers themselves who, almost all retailers have a white label service, like, right, they have their own brands, right? Amazon or Whole Foods has their Whole Foods 360. Everyone's got their own brands. Well, the product inside those brands needs to come from somewhere. And so we're getting a lot of interest from there. So capital, we've got operations, and then offtake.
That brings me to another just really nitpicky question, but is there a place where the general public can go to see which brands are buying from Eden Green?
Not right now. The brands that we're just starting to supply to, I'm on the verge of announcing it, so I can't say it on this podcast. I'm so close. But we're producing our first harvest for them, and then it's slowly it's making its way through their own supply chain to the customers who want it first. So very, very soon, if your audience subscribes to any of the Eden Green social channels, Eden Green Tech, or can email me, they'll find out really soon which growers and which labels are having our produce.
Yeah,
so audience,
and we will.
You almost heard it here first. Almost.
Yeah, almost heard it here first. Yeah, and we will be watching for that too, and push it out on our social media too, because this is such impactful work that you're doing. Tony, any other questions before we wrap?
I think just your normal wrap question. I'm good. That there was so much here. I want to go deeper, but I know we're out of time. So
yeah, no, this is so intriguing. And I have, my wheels are spinning thinking about how we can support your efforts. So the last question we generally ask is, are there organizations or charities, nonprofits that you have a particular affinity for that we could give a shout out to, and then drop any information about them into the show notes?
Yeah. So Seed Effect, which is, they're totally unrelated, but somehow, some way, I'm just all involved in all the green. But I've been on the board of an organization called Seed Effect for about 7 years now. And they provide microfinance opportunities to women, mostly women in refugee camps in South Sudan, and then in northern Uganda. So we've been able, I say we, just because I've been on the board for so long, but we've been able to help people in these refugee camps save and then loan out money in these savings groups, loan out money and gain a return on it. And they're building this investor mindset and really empowering entrepreneurs within these refugee camps to actually make a living. We have this misconception that refugee camps are tents and they're there for a couple of years. The reality is now, because of the nature of the wars and conflicts that are going on, refugee camps exist for decades. And so people have their economies that form in there. Whole generations grow up in refugee camps. And so in these economies, there's opportunities for economic empowerment. And so that's what Seed Effect is doing. And it's just found at seedeffect.org. Great organization. Super proud to be a part of that.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, if that's it, Tony, we will wrap up here. But Eddy, thank you so much for your time. This has been such a great conversation. And I know that Tony and I just get such humbled by the opportunity to have this podcast and to speak to CEOs such as yourself that are really doing that type of impactful work. So we really do appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts. And if that's all anybody has, I guess we'll call it a conversation, and we will talk to you soon. Thanks again, Eddy.
Thanks, Eddy, so much.
Wow, Betsy, that was an amazing interview. Eddy is, first of all, a very humble leader. And you can see that from the outset of this interview as we talk with him. And I'm blown away by the work that they're doing, the way that he can see strategically what's happening, but the clarity he has about who their customer is, who their investor is, how they can go about and be successful in this business. And I like this idea that I know he borrowed from Peter Thiel, but this idea of what's your 10x differentiator? What do you do 10 times better than everyone else, and focus on that? I mean, that right there is a takeaway that anyone in our audience, if they take that and apply that, their business will skyrocket.
Absolutely. And I also liked the part of the conversation about the customers that you choose to work with, and how sometimes you have to take a short-term hit. And, one of the things he said was we got that money back that they lost by not re-upping with the client in, what did he say? I can't remember how quickly.
I think it was 6 months or something like that.
Yeah, 6 months. But I bet it was even shorter than that, because if you think about, he retained his team and their morale didn't suffer. And I bet there are a lot of harder things to measure that even probably got that return even faster. And, it's so fun to meet an entrepreneur like Eddy that clearly has an amazing background, knows his stuff, is very passionate, but then, he knows how to make this an actual business. There are a lot of entrepreneurs that have huge hearts and they're out to solve a lot of really big, important problems, but maybe don't have the business chops to do it, and maybe aren't as humble and looking for mentorship and that kind of thing. Whereas Eddy is just a shining example of how it's done. And I've learned a lot from this interview personally, and took copious notes, and just thinking about how do I apply this to my business in much the same way that he has. So very, very inspiring personally and professionally to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the Really Know Your Customer podcast. We hope you enjoyed this interview as much as we enjoyed having it with Eddy, and we will see you next time on the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodo.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.